So in the previous slide video, we went through bracket placement module. And remember, you have to validate those. If you don't, it will ask you, but make sure they're validated. You're going to close out of Ortho Analyzer and you're going to go into Appliance Designer. So right now we are in Appliance Designer, and we went ahead and we searched, and no, we're not going to use Testy McTest. We go at Test, and whenever you see a plus out to the side, you know there's something below that. So Test has BB test, and that was actually our bracket placement. So we're going to go ahead and click, and we're going to right click on that, and we're going to pick new appliance. Now, often for the appliance ID, what I like to do is put the patient's name in there and what bracket they're using, because then we can use this to create an ID tag. I love ID tags. If not, we would have all these all these trays laying around and not knowing who they belong to or what bracket goes in them. So we're going to call this one BB test, and if you remember, it had Ultra in the top and Smart Clip in the bottom. Here we're going to call it a digital bonding tray. And this is a really important part that can get kind of confusing. We're going with 0 shell, 1 bar. So let's pick that one. We're also going to use a Moonray printer. So we've selected Moonray out of the list. And then we're also using the NextDent indirect bonding material. And all we're going to do now is create. So what you're going to see pull up will be your model, and you'll have the brackets placed. You're going to click yes through all this, because yes, you did this all in Ortho Analyzer. You did create all those planes. I like to unclick this because there's actually a progress bar underneath it, and if I leave that little model up there, it tends to get in the way, and I keep hitting next too many times because I get impatient. So get rid of it, then go ahead. Using our technique, we do not play with any of this. These have already been established, so I don't touch any of those in for the containers. And then we just hit next, and it's creating that master model. What it's doing right now is it's filling in all the undercuts, and I'll show you a couple things you're going to look for. That's probably even a little bit more obvious when you have a bracket that has a slot like a Smart Clip or a Clarity Advanced bracket. Sometimes this can take a little bit of time. See, one thing you need to keep in mind when you're going to be direct printing a tray, all undercuts need to be blocked out, and that includes the vertical and the horizontal slot. When I show you in the slide where you pick your brackets, it's going to be really important that you pick the right bracket file, because they've already been filled in for us. So you can see really it creates almost just like a blob, and some people will look at this and think, is that enough for retention? Yes, it is. You'd be surprised if you print these trays and follow this technique. You should be able to shake your tray upside down and the bracket should stay in, so don't let this concern you. This blue arrow is really the path of insertion, how you're going to seat this tray. Normally they turn out right. I've only ever had two that the arrow was in a weird spot. If you see that, unlock it, turn to the view that you want, and then click it to change that insertion direction. So at that point, just go ahead and click next. Here's where we're going to define where we want our tray to be. So we don't have to touch anything here. All we need to do is draw the outline. I like to go slightly distal to the last molar or tooth we're going to be bonding. I also like to imagine where the wings are at. At the molar, we're going to go slightly higher, particularly if you have a bracket that's non-convertible and it doesn't have a tie wing. You're going to have to embed that more into the plastic. And then I like to do 2 points on each tooth. In some techniques, if you're creating a shell, you're going to go in between. So if you see that, don't do this. If you want to do it just like we're doing to direct print a tray, just go on the bracket. And a lot of times too, if they're a little bit higher, we're going to add a little bit more heights to that tray. And this is a fun one because this area here is going to get kind of tricky, and I'll show you how to adjust it. So you're going to connect all of the dots. Now, say if I had a tooth I wasn't bonding, or a tooth that wasn't present, a more deciduous tooth, go straight to the next one. Don't touch that tooth, because wherever you touch it, it's going to dip it in. And for the bulk of this tray, we want there to be a thickness interproximal. So always pick the bracket, or if there's not a bracket on the tooth, pick the next tooth with a bracket and just leave it as a straight line. Unlike when you're doing a model, you don't have to connect these. You just have to tell it its terminal points. And then at this point, you're going to hit next again, and it's going to start to create that shell for you. I like to start at the occlusal. Now remember on that right side where we could make things more, we could make them disappear, or we could make them more transparent. Go ahead and grab that bar and move it to where you can actually see the teeth underneath. I like to do that, because there's certain things with this model that you might not see all the time, but that's why I wanted to share it. You notice where it looks darker? That's where those two layers are overlapping, and if you leave those there and print them, what you'll see is a little spiky part sticking up in your tray. If you see it, don't panic. You can always just cut it out, but the easiest way is to eliminate them from the beginning. So if I go in, and you can see how these will rotate and get rid of that part where the trays kind of overlapped each other. And a lot of times you don't see it, but in cases where there's more of a malocclusion, more crowding, you may see that overlapped area. And I like to start here just to eliminate those. One, so I remember to do it, and two, sometimes it'll affect the shape on the front. So I like that. If you want to get fancy and fill in any places and make it nice and smooth, wherever you have those green lines, you can move those if you'd like to. If you want more coverage on the occlusal surface, and that's something you can set up for yourself. Usually I'll keep it right about here, and I don't worry that it's not rounded. I'll usually keep it flat. If you'd like it to round around, just go ahead and you can wrap around. For some reason, if you drew from the opposite direction, say if you'd happen to see something like this, don't panic even though you want to. What happens is you drew your points from one side and you had your bars set up to draw from the other, and that's something you'll set up the control panel. So if you happen to see that, don't freak out. Just go down and tell it, yep, no, that's the direction I went, and you'll see it center itself. Now, next thing I take a look at is how high up. I need to cover half to 2/3 of the bracket. I don't want to cover the whole bracket, because remember, we want to insert directly down into that bracket. So we're going to need an opening there. If you happen to go up too far, what will happen is your tray is going to start to be inside that bracket, and it's going to make it harder to insert. So we may want to take these molars up just a little bit, and then I want to watch wherever there's big differences between the heights to see where that ends up. But we actually look pretty good there, and the same there. So often you may need to adjust that. The other thing you're going to have to look for when there's a bit of a significance in the malocclusion, or things are really rotated, or there's a lot of crowding, you may find that when you look at this, you'll see a bracket sticking outside the tray, meaning the tray is too thin. You can then, let's make this a little bit darker, it's easier to see. You can then take these little green spots here and you could thicken up your tray. So you can see how you could make it wider or thicker in certain parts. And sometimes I'll find I'll do that if there's a tooth that's really lingually set, that I may want there to be just a little bit more bulk to the tray, so you can see how you can move these. So it's all pretty easy. And once I like that tray, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to hit next. Now what I need to do is separate my tray design from the model. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract the model. Now with this bracket file that we use, and our bracket files are going to have at least the 1.1. If you use a 3M bracket file that has a 1.0, when you download it, the bracket slots won't be filled. So if you're using the files that I'm going to recommend, you have to subtract the model, but you also want to get rid of these 2 points here, because that's already built in to that bracket file. So just get rid of those, and you're going to move forward. And what it's doing now is it's just taking that model out. If for some reason you forget to subtract the model and you end up with just kind of a big blob when you're done, just go back. It'll let you redo it. Now at this point, we are a little bit too thick. And so we're going to want, and plus we're not flat. If you want to try to print this, you wouldn't be able to print it flat on your printer. You'd have to put some supports, and you don't want to do that. Plus it's too thick. The other thing I always look for to see, can I see all the bracket base? If you'd happen to have any of those little spiky things sticking up, you can go ahead and you could cut them out. But I always end up cutting my tray too, because I don't want it to be this thick and I want it to be flat. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to take a plain cut, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a line. Oops, that's not going to be that's going to be too close to my teeth. I'm going to go ahead and draw a line. Now, wherever the arrow is what it's going to take away. So if I would just leave it there and cut, I would panic because my tray would go away and I don't have brackets. So we're going to go hit undo, and we're going to go ahead, cut it, and now let's swap direction. So I wanted to show you that because that'll freak you out too. And then I take a look at the side and see, particularly in cases where there's the curve of speed is really significant, or um, I don't know how I ended up over there. Actually, I'm going to clear that off. I didn't want to see that happen. So I'm going to go ahead and let's cut again. There we go. And I'm going to, that's not what I wanted at all. Let's try that one more time. There we go. I did a better job that time. And then I'm going to swap direction. I might be a little bit close on those incisors, so I'm going to move it down just a hair. If you wanted to move the whole thing up or down, you could then toggle from here. When you see the whole ring blue, we'll see it move downward. And then let's remember to hit the apply. A lot of times I'll forget, but if you hit apply, it's going to show you what you look like. If you don't like it, like I was doing, you just keep on doing it till you get what you want. And that looks pretty good there. We can see that we see the upper portion of the bracket. For some reason, if I get to this point and I don't like something, like, oh, maybe I need more, maybe I need less, just hit the back button until you get where you're going. It will hold all of your changes. It's not like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose everything that I've done. If you go backwards to adjust maybe an angle, or maybe you see that little spiky thing and you want to get rid of the overlaps, it'll hold everything when you start going next, so you're not really wasting your time. At this point, we're going to hit next again. It's going to validate, and you're going to start to finalize. At this point, if you go up where it says 1, 2, 3, add an ID tag, that's where I like to add that ID tag. And you're going to go ahead, and then this first ID tag, if you wanted added additional ones, which we're going to do later, we can add one. But because I put that in the text in there, it's going to pop up that patient's name. Since it's the upper, I'm going to get rid of the smart clip. That's why when Ashley goes to load trays, she knows what she's putting in. Detachable are kind of a little tag that hangs off the side. We like the integrated, so we're going to go ahead and put an integrated tag right here. And now you can see. The only advice I have, this size seems to work well. You can make them bigger or smaller. If you have somebody that has a really long name and you would put it in an area where it has to curve around, make sure it's not hanging off the side. I've had a couple where the name was so long that I kind of hung off to the edge and then kind of created a weak spot in that tray. But keeping them flat like this works well. You can adjust the location if you want to using the little arrows that you'll see on that little adjuster there. But so I kind of like that. So, but remember, this was the setup where I put a central bracket here and I inverted the laterals. So what you can do just to kind of alert your lab tech, let's add another tag, and we're going to put right here, and we're going to tell Ashley that is a lateral. And that way she'll know. And a lot of those I'll make smaller because just her seeing something there, she'll know that there's something special. She needs to look at the lab slip. So if not, sometimes it's hard to remember. So we can put that like right there. And that might be a little too small. Then we can keep it inward, but let's make it a little bit bigger. You can see that's going to adjust that there. So what I could do is I could do that for the, inverted. Oh, that's not a lateral. Don't let me do that. Shoot, that's actually a central. I was going to edit that part out, but now it's much more authentic. Yep, that was a central. And there's the inverted lateral. So I can keep adding as many tags as I want to alert your lab tech, or even if your clinical assistant looks in there and say, hey, Ashley put the wrong bracket in. No, it's actually is supposed to be a central. So then we'll go ahead and process this, and then we're going to move on to the lower. And I think I'll share the lower. If you don't want to see the lower, you can just fast forward through all of that and go directly to where the tray is going to be exported. And again, we just take a little bit of time to render. This is the time you can get up and go pull something off the printer and wash it and get that started, so it's not like you're just kind of hanging out here waiting. I think some of the things that I really want to share with you, and I'll share in the next slide, is that you're getting the right files and that you've also set some of the default parameters in your control panel to be able to do this technique. And it's a technique that we've been doing for about a year now. We do majority of our bondings this way, and it's very reliable. You can print it as one piece. The print process isn't difficult, but you've got to have some of these parameters set up or it won't work at all. So again, that insertion looks good. Just click next. Again, we're going to draw our spline like we did before. Some people will do just one point on a bracket. I like to do two, and just don't go in between the teeth. You're going to end up with one really flimsy shell. And again, when you're picking which technique you're using 0 shells, 1 bar. A shell is kind of, if you think of it, it tries to make something that looks kind of like if you suck down. If you did like a Vacutane type clear or flexible material, that's what it tries to make. The problem with that is it's really, really hard to print if you can get it to print accurately at all. So skip the shell, just do the bar, and I guarantee it will be thick enough and rigid enough but accurate enough. So again, because this case was crowded, you see some of these crossovers right here, and that's why I wanted to share. Sometimes when people are trying to teach you stuff, they show you the really easy ones, and then when you try to do the harder ones, you're like, what the heck? So bear with me as I get rid of some of these. It took me a long time to figure out where the heck these little things would come from. Sometimes I would print on my model or print my tray, and there'd be a little spike, and it was like this little spiky thing right here, and we just kind of pull it off and they seem to work, but I thought there has to be a way to get rid of that. And this is it. You just don't want those lines crisscrossing each other, and you can move them all. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to figure out which one goes with which. And again, if this is really boring you can just fast forward, but I wanted to include everything I learned on this one case, because this is where it can get a little tricky. And trying to eliminate some of those areas that cross over one another. And I may leave one for us to play with here. Let's see what we get there. And then look at the height of your tray. Sometimes on the lower, it seems like it goes a little bit higher than what I actually chose. So I think I need to maybe move my points down. So it seems like on the bottom is where I'm constantly kind of dropping these down just a little bit in the posterior. And again, too, when you have areas of crowding, you may find that you just want to bulk them up a little bit for that rigidity. One thing that has surprised me is we're able to print these as one piece, and that we're able to seat them as one piece too. If you feel like you want to do segments, you can segment them either in the design process, or sometimes I think it's easier just to create the whole thing. You can export it, and you could cut it using something like a splicing tool in something like Windows 10 or something that will allow you to split a file. But it's possible to do it in 3Shape too. I just don't do it. Alrighty, let's take a look and see what we've got. So we're going to go ahead and let's subtract the model. Remember, important part, uncheck those and keep going. We'll see. I think I left this little spiky part so I can show you how to get rid of it if you don't want to go backwards. So when we look inside, not too much, but there's a little bit right there. You can use some of the wax knife tools there. I'll be honest with you, those take a little bit of time. If it's something I can get with a plain cut, I like that. I can just kind of cut through there. clear it out, because if it's really sticking up, you may find that it makes it harder to seat your tray. What I'm looking for is to see how much the bracket grabs. I think you can get a pretty good idea that if you were to turn this tray, this bracket here needs some more support. So let's go back and pick that up before we slice it. So just go backward, and it's going to let us go back till this point here, and we're going to want to bulk that up a little bit. So I think I want to bring it out. Those are sometimes tricky to find the right point. If we can bring it. Made it a little thicker. Gonna move it over a little bit. See, that's why I like to do the back side, because sometimes I think when I'm undoing those little things, I'm also changing the front side. You just don't realize it. So I think that's going to work better for us. It's going to give us a little more coverage. So you can play with those and see what you've got. And then we'll go back where we came from. Oh, yep, notice we had that little spiky part there. So we'll go ahead and clear that. It remembered that I did that. But you can see now that bracket looks like it's actually going to stay in the tray. And I tend, remember, if you slide that down, you can actually see where your teeth are at. Obviously, this is way too thick. Let's use a plain cut to cut it in this direction. Let's swap the cut direction. If I could teach myself to draw that line in the opposite direction, I wouldn't have to do that all the time. We'll just move that whole thing up. I think that probably looks better there, and we'll go ahead and apply that. And then once we're done cutting, we're going to just finalize that. We'll add a name tag on it. If you forget and just do detachable, this is that thing. It's kind of weird. So let's go integrated. This is the bottom, so let's get rid of the ultra. Let's go ahead and put that in. And there's another step. This is totally optional, but I helped develop it for a friend of mine who just had a hard time holding on to these little trays. I've got the advantage I have fingernails. Some people don't. So what can I do? Well, again, this is part of our workflow, so I just want to share it because you probably won't find it anyplace else. If you go up here, these are attachments. It's made to look like an implant or different restorative things, but that's also where, if you were using aligners, your aligner attachments would be. If you go ahead and click on that, it's going to allow you to add an attachment. We're still right here on the ID tag, which we're fine with. Let's go ahead and move down to attachments. From that attachment library, we can grab some shapes. And what I always just do is that we've got our aligner attachments, we've got a rectangular, actually we like where's the cylinder? The cylinder works nice. And then if I go ahead and tell it, yep, I'm going to put a little cylinder right here, I can put a little cylinder right here. You don't want to be below because that's going to mess up your print, but it's not going to let you do that, so that's good. Get it close. We're gonna move it down, and you can make it any size you want. Those aren't very big considering that's about 3 millimeters sticking out, but this way it just gives you a little tab to hold on to them. People seem to like them, and they're super easy. You can adjust them. You can adjust how big they are, where they're located by all these little different things here. So you might like those if you find you have hard. I never really need them on the bottom because you hold it from underneath. These you have to grab it and flip it, so those kind of help out. So once you like it, and if you like your little attachments, again, totally optional, we'll go ahead and say, yep, we like it. Now what you're looking at is you have both your upper and lower trays. They're on your model, and here's where you're going to save things. If you just go over to the right and click here, you're going to save this session. So you can save it maybe if you're partially through a session and you want to save it, you can save it. I'm going to export it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to export that file as, because we just have a certain location. You have to tell it what you want. So we're going to take both the upper and the lower, and then where you're going to save it to. For us, we just have a print file that we keep on a certain drive. We go ahead and we put it into our print file. I like to put the patient's name so we remember who it actually is. And then if you wanted to do all of them, you could, but usually we're just going to take the trays, click OK, and now we're set to print. What we can do then is take that print file out of the file, drop it onto our Moonray or our Envision Tech, and then go ahead and print our tray.